We are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today, I'm joined by Chicago Bulls legend John Paxson. John, thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, Brent, it's a pleasure to be with you.
One thing that comes up over and over and over again, and the things that your old teammates consistently say about you, is it all comes back to you being tough as nails, effectively, every time. What made you so tough?
What they saw from me was the result of a guy that, look, I was never the fastest, wasn't very athletic. I knew what I had to do to survive and as a basketball player. And I really learned that when I got to Notre Dame, when the caliber of competition grew and the size and athleticism was something that, you got used to, you had to get used to quickly. So really, I had to be competitive and tough, and that's really what I like to think of it as the fact I was competitive, that I didn't like to lose. So uh, I stood my ground when I had to, but it also was a result of I have an older brother Jim who was he's 4 school years older than me, 3 years older than me, and when you grow up as a younger brother of somebody who you kind of aspire to be like, but he doesn't want you to get there, and he kinda puts you in your place at every opportunity. I think it hardens you to an extent. So, um, I just as a player, I valued, uh, the competitiveness, and I think it's one of the reasons I did last for a long time in the league is because I think I had that, and I had some teammates that respected it.
Your most iconic moment in your Bulls career is this very famous Game 6 finals shot against the Phoenix Suns, sealing a championship and a three-peat for the Chicago Bulls. Do you think that being clutch like that, is that something that you're born with, or is that something that can actually be learned over time? And I'm curious too, because obviously you've been on the player development side as well.
Yeah, it's that's actually a really good question because I don't know if it can be learned, but you have to be in those situations. Like you have to be able to put yourself in those situations or be put in those situations. And I ended up many times in my career where I was put in that position. And that shot obviously is one that I'm you know grateful that it happened. But I'd had some other shots along the way with the Bulls over the years that gave me the confidence and really gave, I'm sure, that my teammates and the coaching staff the confidence in me to step up in those moments. So, it's funny. I would always I'd laugh. I had a couple buddies of mine back in the day. They'd say, "Well, you were wide open. I could have made that shot." And I like to say to them, "You know what? No, you didn't put yourself in the position to make those shots. I did." So again, you just keep battling. I had a lot of tough moments in my career. In fact, that shot, what I remember about that whole season is it was our three-peat. We were kind of beat up from the 2 previous years. They were grinds, really hard years, and that 3rd year was a grind too, and we were down 2-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Knicks, and we ended up winning that series 4-2 to get to the finals against Phoenix. I had had a year where I had a lot of injuries. At that time, when the playoffs started, you had to put down your 12-man playoff roster. And honestly, I wasn't even sure because of my injuries, the fact that I didn't play a lot and I hadn't played really well when I did play, I wasn't even sure I was going to be on the playoff roster, to be honest. So to be in that position and to have the opportunity to make that shot, I still think sometimes like, man, I was really fortunate to be in that position. But again, I think a lot of it was perseverance, and I was a survivor, and I just kept surviving my throughout my career and got to that point.
You talk about how there were other shots like it, or other moments, I guess, like that throughout your career. What was your approach to training? I'm sure consistency and, all the things that you would hear that are totally table stakes, but like when you got up in the mornings, you had a long 11-year career. What was it that drove you to put in those hours and to have the consistency required so that when you found yourself in those spots, you were ready?
I played in an era where the money obviously wasn't what it is now. And I was a young guy. I got married a year out of college. We had 2 kids. I was trying to support for my family. And even though I was making a wonderful living by all standards, It was really like, you're trying to provide. So the motivation was easy. In terms of training, it's so different now. And, I think all of us who played in that era wish we had available to us the resources that guys have today. I mean, the nutrition and the recovery and all the things that organizations supply to players to keep them healthy. And I think it's one of the reasons, you mentioned I had an 11-year career. At that time, that was a pretty long career. Now you're seeing guys play 15 to 20 years. LeBron's going to enter his 24th season this year. And it's a testament to these guys and their commitment to training and taking care of their bodies. I just wish we had when I was ending my career, we had just started to use massage into our recovery and things like that. That now is just a staple of every player's existence. So it was obviously different, but again, when you're going through it, all you have available to you is what you have available to you. And I was one that I like to train. We started to lift as a team in the late '80s, and that was something that was unique. We had a guy by the name of Al Vermeil. The Vermeil name is synonymous with football. Dick Vermeil was a longtime coach, Hall of Famer, world Super Bowl champion, all that. His brother Al was on the cutting edge of Olympic lifting and explosiveness training, and we were starting that just at the time, mid '80s to late '80s, and it was something that we did as a team together. But in the off seasons, a lot of times I like to do things on my own, and I would try to push myself, challenge myself. I'm from a small area outside of Dayton, Ohio. Go back in the summer times, and there was a hill by my in-laws' house that I would challenge myself most days. That I would run up and down, and for me, it was the mental thing. Am I doing more than the next guy or the guy that I'm going to be competing against? So that was kind of my thing. Back then, you were allowed to do a lot of things individually in the off season. Now it is scripted. These guys are in your practice facility, um, as much as you let them, and it's scripted about what they do and how they work. And again, I think it plays into the longevity that these guys have now.
When it comes to player evaluation today, or at least in this more modern era, given how many tools and resources these guys have at their disposal, how did you approach evaluating intangibles and things that maybe would set someone apart when you've got two guys who have each spent, 8 hours a day with personalized training and every facility and trainer at their disposal for decades? What were the intangibles that you weighed heaviest?
So I was given the job as the executive VP of basketball ops with the Bulls in 2003, and my first draft, we at the time the Bulls had a young guard named Jay Williams who had played at Duke, and the week before our first draft, Jay had a horrible motorcycle accident that effectively ruined his career. So it was going to be the start of his second season. He had been the second pick in the draft the year before. So I go into our first draft, and we end up drafting a young guard out of Kansas named Kirk Heinrich. And I say young guard, but he was a 4-year college player at that time, had a winning pedigree. And I learned very early on that in my mind, what separated players was, and I don't think we talk about it enough anymore, is winners, winning type of players. And Kirk was a winning type of player. We drafted a kid, Ben Gordon, who came out of Connecticut, national champion. We drafted Joakim Noah, who was at the time a very unpopular pick for us, two-time national champion. I can go down the list. But the thing to me that they all had in common, it's that winning pedigree, but it's also what I would call basketball character. They understood what it was to be a good teammate. They knew how to sacrifice for the good of the team. They were willing to do the dirty work in a game. And I've left players out that I totally respect and love that we had in our organization. But I think that is something that you can go a long way with. Now, there's no question that you need talent, and we all are looking for that special athlete that changes the game. I mean, look at the NBA now with Victor Wembanyama, who is just I mean, physically, his size and his length and his athleticism, he's changing the game in a lot of ways. But there are so few guys like that, and I felt that in order to establish something, you had to find those guys with basketball character. And I will say this till the day I can't speak anymore, but the mistakes I made in terms of decisions in a executive role were basketball character mistakes. And I'll go down with guys that are tough and competitive and fight every night. That those are the type of guys that I want on our team.
Basketball character, that I'll remember that line. If you found yourself with the chance to interview guys who you're about to draft, what are the types of questions that you like to ask that you think reveal a lot about the character underneath the player?
I think those type of situations, I know there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. It is like speed dating because you get 20 to 25 minutes with these young men, and you just I always looked at it as just a way to get to know them a little bit better. You do so much background and research on these guys prior to these conversations that pretty much everything about them. So it's more or less kind of verifying maybe something, seeing if they'll answer a question honestly, because you do already know the answer to it. But it's a difficult process. I think what's behind the scenes of all those things is the amount of background that all teams do now in the NBA. Because when you think about it, when you draft a player and you sign him to a contract, you're investing a lot of money in this young man. And you want to have as a good idea of who he is, what he stands for, how he represents himself. Because if you make those mistakes, it's not only a financial mistake, but it can be a blemish on your organizational reputations.
You went straight from your final year of playing to immediately transitioning to an assistant coaching role with your same team, correct?
My first year out, I did some radio for the Bulls. I did the color along a great guy named Neil Funk. But it was my second year and that I went on the staff. And I think I know where you're going with this. That was difficult. I did it because of my respect for Phil Jackson. Phil asked me if I wanted to go that route. And I didn't know at the time if I wanted to coach or not, but I had such great respect for him. And we had three assistant coaches at the time that I had played for as well. Tex Winter, who is a legend and you hear about those old time Bulls teams in the '90s and this triangle offense that we ran. Well, Tex was the architect of that, and it got a lot of it got dissected by a million people. In reality, it was very simple offense in terms it was read and react. It was based on fundamentals, footwork. Uh, I'd love to. I could spend a couple hours talking about the intricacies of that I believe in and love. But I had great respect for him. We had another older coach named Johnny Bach who uh, was just this tough former uh, naval guy that had that mentality of the military, and he brought an element. I loved him. And we had Jim Clemens, who was a former player who had kind of had the softer side, but they were all people I just tremendously respected. So I gave it a shot that year, and um, while I know I learned in the coaches meetings every day, I learned so much about teaching the how and the why, which I never really thought of much about as a player, but when those 4 would drill down on it every day, it was pretty special. But I realized during that year that coaching probably wasn't in my future. It's a different, not that the difficulty of it was an issue. It's more, I think you have to have a personality and a mentality that is patient, and really wasn't me. And honestly, at the time, my boys were 6 and 9, and I hadn't been that year. I was not around them much at all, and so it kind of sparked something in my head, like, you know what, this probably isn't what you want to do. And the Bulls organization, think about this, Brent. I signed with the Bulls as a player in 1985. I have effectively, outside of the 1 year after coaching, and I still did a little TV toward the end of that year, but I've been with that organization over 40 years now. And
Wow.
for a guy like me, I couldn't have dreamed for a better life. So they gave me opportunities to do things that I never thought. And so I was sitting there doing radio for a number of years through the '98 through the three-peat. And I'll get back to the trying to coach some of the guys that I played with, but um, they gave me every opportunity. And but on that year on the staff, so think about this. That was the year that the Bulls won 72-10, and we won our fourth championship. And it was the first championship, the second three-peat. And outside of Michael and Scotty, that's when Dennis Rodman came on. That group was a completely different animal than our first three-peat. We were kind of we didn't have the personality. Dennis gave them something too that we obviously didn't have, and they rode it for 3 years, and it was really fun to kinda be on the sideline there doing games and watching them every night, but, that year that I was on the staff, it was difficult because it was hard for me to, if I saw something, I tried to have a very deliberate way of, like, if I saw something with a player that I'd just been a teammate of, a few years before, I tried to bring it up in a way that it was just conversational and like a, whatever, but, um, it was hard. It could be uncomfortable, and, I'm glad I chose the other route.
If you could boil it down to one word, what is the word association game that you assign to that first three-peat team and then to that second three-peat team? What is the word that pairs with each of them?
I think the first group, we were grinders. We were grinders. I think the second group, boy, that's a great question. I don't know what one word. They were, I don't know if this will make sense, but they were a little more theatrical. There was like a show every time they went on the court, and most of it was because of Dennis. I mean, if you think about it, he brought something to the table that was just so unique. He had the different hair colors at times, and he could be a guy that, like, when those lights went on, it turned him on. It energized him. But our first group, and this is the difference between the two, in my opinion. So when I got there in '85, it was Michael's second year, and he had just I signed the day he broke his foot out in Golden State, and he missed most of that season. Came back, we made the playoffs. We were the 8th seed against Boston and got swept, but when he came back, outside of, myself and Michael, the team changed a lot over the next few years. They traded for Bill Cartwright, they drafted Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, added some key pieces off the bench, and our team took our lumps against Detroit for a lot of years. We got beat up, we got beat in the playoffs consistently year after year, and that's why I termed us grinders, is that we had to grind our way to the point where we could beat Detroit. And in 1990, we lost in 7 games in the conference finals, 1 game away from the finals, and the next year, we were able to beat them, swept them in 4, and made it to the finals and beat the Lakers in '91, which was our first championship. So that's why I call us grinders. We really had to go through the war of beating Detroit and getting to where we want. And look, that second three-peat, those guys were terrific, and I got friends from that group: Steve Kerr, Judd Bushler, Bill Wennington. I mean, those people they're fantastic people, and they had the experience of a lifetime too. But I'm obviously partial to the 3 that I played on because of what we had to endure to get to where we got to. The second group, they were ready made, when Michael came back, and where we weren't that first three-peat.
People got a nice inside look at things through the Last Dance documentary, and there's endless media and ways to dig into this, but I would like to hear it straight from the source. What was it like in terms of power dynamics in this organization that had your front office people, obviously Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan? How did you perceive those power dynamics as they were happening in real time?
It was uncomfortable because when you go through those things, and again, my perspective was I came in 1985, and so that last run went 1988, that 1998. That's a long, for me. It's 13 years of seeing it evolve
Mhm.
and getting to know the people involved. And I had respect for every one of those people, but we all know in relationships things change and dynamics can change. And I just think, you see this a lot of times, and I'm not saying anybody in that group um got power hungry or anything like that, because that's not what happened. But with success comes some things that you are forced to maybe confront. And I think there just was kind of a butting of heads of personalities. Jerry Krause was completely a different personality than Phil Jackson, completely different. And Michael was a strong-willed person, always has been. His competitiveness sets him apart from any player I think that has ever played the game. So it was just a different dynamic. And I do know that over time that Jerry Krause passed away a number of years ago. We just lost one of our teammates from our first three-peat. Stacy King passed away less than a month ago, and I know that over time things soften, feelings, perspective, how you look at, your life. I mean, I know those things have softened. So it was great TV, the Last Dance. I loved watching. I mean, the whole setup during COVID was, it was like back in the day when you were a kid and you had to wait a week to see the next episode. So it was fun from that perspective. But I think all of us now, when we look back on it, I think most people would say, you know what, we look at it a little differently now, that that power dynamic that kind of happened then.
If you look at beginning of your career at the early mid '80s to even 1998 as a benchmark or as a kind of checkpoint, how much could you innately feel the changes that were happening at the league level of just popularity, commercialization? How did you experience that? Just like the entire machine that you were in growing bigger and bigger. And of course, you fast forward to 2026. I'm sure it's unrecognizable compared to
Yeah.
when you first got going. But how did you perceive that?
Everything started to become more professional, more, for lack of a better term, more, everything was viewed more as a corporation, like really running a business.
Right.
So, for example, when the Bulls organization, with as we started to get success in the late '80s and then into the early championship years, ownership, Jerry Reinsdorf, had the idea of building a individualized practice facility just for our team. Up until that point, we were practicing in all teams. They didn't have their own place. We were in a health club in a Chicago suburb, and so, and the court we practiced on, it was just one court, and it wasn't even regulation size. It was a little bit, length. It was a little bit shorter, and that's where we practiced every day. So you started to see this buildup, and you have to give David Stern a ton of credit, because at the league level, he was understanding how to monetize everything and to grow the business. And at that time, all of a sudden, salary cap numbers started increasing, player salary started increasing, all these things started. And then, if you fast forward to now, when you take a look at the size of organizations that they were in the late '90s, early 2000s, the size now of, just on the business side, it's unique. They a lot of people covering a lot of ground. And on the basketball side, with coaching staffs, with training staffs, you go down the line. I mean, it's that you have a lot of people that you're dealing with. So um, everything has increased. The money obviously is there for organizations to spend, and everything most organizations do is to try to benefit the player. And we built a new practice facility, because the one that initially was built in '92, we had outgrown in the Chicago suburbs. We built a one downtown right next to the United Center. We moved in 12 years ago, and already 12 years now removed, we are feeling a little bit of a pinch in terms of space and things we would like to do to expand and that type of thing. So it's just never ending. And there are, I know Utah right now is in the process of building a facility that is going to be second to none, and that's the direction of it. So it's just, everything has exploded. The popularity of the sport is at an all-time high. I know that the finals, I know New York, having New York in the finals this year and winning it was a benefit to the league. But the viewership on different platforms, the league is taking advantage of that, as most sports leagues are doing now, because they have to. So it's just gotten to be big business, and there are a lot of people, myself included, that we're very fortunate to still be a part of it.
What was the first individual player contract that you remember hearing about and thinking, "Holy smokes."
Oh, wow, that's, you know what, it's, to give perspective, when I first came in the league in '83, I believe the salary cap for the entire league was about $5 million for the entire league, and there weren't as many rules. When Michael Jordan came in, I think he signed like a 7 or 8-year contract. They've, with through collective bargaining now, there's different rules, that type of thing. Now the salary cap is going to be in excess of $190 million, and they have all these exceptions that have been collectively bargained now, that teams can go over that cap, and that's why you see all these salaries that are the way they are. But the very first one, I don't know, but you started seeing signs in the early 2000s that things were jumping. Um, and it's just been, again, it's a testament to the success of the league because it's not those salaries aren't going down and the league's not going anywhere. So and again, you have to look back at what David Stern has done and had done, prior to him leading the as commissioner. But he had the vision, and we've reaped the rewards.
Yeah, no kidding. What is something kind of moving more towards the front office side of things? It's easy to forget that you mentioned earlier LeBron being the crazy outlier example of a 24-year career, but there are significant age gaps on these teams, and these guys are so young. I mean, it makes me feel old. I'm 28, and I'm watching a game, and they'll say that a guy was born in 2006 or 2007, which is just crazy to me. But from the front office leadership side, how did you manage both an 18-year-old and, say, a 32-year-old in the same room? How do you deal with that? Because it really is pretty unique.
Well, what you hope for is that 32-year-old is the guy that mentors and picks up that 18-year-old and kind of takes him into it. And really, when you're building a roster and you do have a lot of young players, you need those type of vets
Yeah.
that because they're the ones that are around each other every day. And I've been around a ton of great vets. I mean, we haven't had him on our roster in a couple of years, but DeMar DeRozan, who's been in the league a long time, is now out. Been out in Sacramento, but he was the perfect example or perfect model for how to take care of young players and show them through example of how to be a pro. Because I will tell you this, the best compliment I can give any player that's in the league is if I call him a professional, because that means he's coming to work every day, he's doing his job, he's picking up his teammates, he understands what that's all about. But the thing about the young players today that's much different is they're growing up in a system, and I will, it's before they even get to our league, and it's not the college system, but it's the grassroots system of AAU basketball and things like this, where these guys are they're so much more mature at a young age than we ever were. When I was watching the finals this year, and I saw San Antonio with that young roster, I mean,
Mhm.
Wembanyama, Dylan Harper, Stephon Castle, those guys are all early 20s. I mean,
Right.
21, 22. And the first time I walked onto an NBA floor in an NBA finals, I was 30 years old.
Hmm.
I was in a fog the entire game. I didn't play well. We lost the game at home to the Lakers, and I was 30 years old, and I had children, and I was a mature adult, and I was overwhelmed by that experience in a lot of ways. And to watch those young kids compete and perform and play and not be phased by those finals. I mean, maybe they were in the fourth quarters and weren't able to complete games, but it was remarkable to me. But I think it's a product of how they're growing up now. They are exposed to competition and other great players from the time they're teenagers, early teenagers. They go through that AAU system. I think that benefits them in that regard. Uh, so but I do believe that you have to have uh, organizations are so there's so many layers to them now that if you don't have good veterans for your young players, then you're probably going to struggle. And we're in a situation now with the Bulls, and I'm very fortunate to still be a part of them in an advisory role. But we got lucky in the lottery this year, so we were able to get the fourth pick in the draft, and we got a terrific young talent in Caleb Wilson, who's going to be wearing a Bulls uniform now, and you can already tell he's a mature 20-year-old young man in terms of his basketball experience. But we're going to need veterans around him, and we already have several good veterans under contract that will be really good for him and for our other young players on the roster.
Yeah, I guess that, quasi professionalization of basically middle school, high school, and
Yeah,
certainly college now, I guess that is a good outcome. It just kind of accelerates the maturity. It certainly makes
yeah.
sense. What is something that you learned once you were inside the front office that you never knew as a player and that you only discovered by being inside of that room within the org?
I think the biggest thing is that as a player, you're just so you have to think about yourself first and foremost. What's best for your career, those type of things. And it's easy in those situations, as a player, to just you worry about yourself. You worry about what you're going to do that day. As in the front office, we are concerned with everything. I mean,
Mm.
and that's just expanded more and more. I mean, you have to outline what players' entire w- day is going to be like. From the minute the guys walk into our facility, now we have to make sure that they are fed, that they are taken care of, through pre-practice type of things that they need. It's just it's so detailed. And even though it wasn't that necessarily that way when I first got the job in 2003 as the EVP, it was much more than I had been exposed to. So you start realizing the responsibility that all of you have as an organization, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at times. But to me, it goes back to so many things. You try to find people that you work well with, that have high character, that are in the boat with you, going in the right direction, and the success of any team is, and Jerry Krause used to say this, a long time ago about, he called it OKP, our kind of people. That's what he wanted. He wanted his kind of people to go to bat with every day. And it's sounds simple, but it's so true. You can't have people pulling in different directions. You can't have people maybe looking out more for themselves individually. It's always got to be about what's best for the organization. And I think when you operate that way, at the end of the day, you can look in the mirror and believe you're doing the right thing.
You had the privilege of playing for Phil Jackson. What is it that is the common thread, you think, or a common thread that some of these coaches who have lasted, there are a handful of coaches that I feel like have been in the NBA since I was a kid. And there are some guys who have just managed to stick around and stick around. And what is the common thread in your eyes that has allowed that longevity for them?
They're authentic. They're who they are. You look at how long Greg Popovich lasted.
Yep.
Uh, Authentic. You knew what you were getting. He was just himself. I can speak to Phil Jackson, what made him great, and what you saw is what you got. And he would do a lot of this meditation with us. And I've been around coaches before who have tried things, to try to expand your horizon a little bit, but they didn't believe it. Phil lived those things. He did those things every day, he practiced them. So when he came to us with them, it was very easy to accept it, try it because it was real. He was authentic. And players are smart. They can read when you're trying to con them, when you're not being yourself. Those guys don't last. I'm sure I know Steve Kerr. I've known him a long time. I've not obviously been to practices, things like that, sat in a meeting room with him, but I'm guarantee you he's authentic in how he goes about his business every day because it's who he is. I mean, that's I saw it a long time ago when he was playing with the Bulls. So I think that's a thing. But you also have to have a good basketball mind. You have to be able to communicate with people, and you have to be able to communicate honestly with them. It's again, you can't. You got to be able to balance that the respect of them hearing you out, but then you have to hear them too. And with players today, they are empowered, and so you have to be able to listen to them and take what they say. And you may disagree, but you have to be a good listener in that aspect.
What has been your one boiled down key to being a part of this Bulls organization for over 40 years, as you said? What has allowed you to stick around?
I think in a nutshell, I've just tried to be honest with everyone I've dealt with. I know that with our ownership, Jerry Reinsdorf and Michael Reinsdorf now, I've I've told them what I believe, good and bad. And so when things come up, that's what I do. I don't want to be the type of person that, sits there and tells them what they want to hear. I want to be able to tell them what I see. And that's why they keep me around. It's the only way you can really forge good relationships with people is if you're upfront and honest. And I think hopefully that's been my key. I don't know. You'd probably have to ask other people, but I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had, and so much of it is the people I've been around and worked with, and nothing better than that.
Well, John, we'll wrap it there. Thank you again so much for taking the time to chat with me. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and there's so much to learn. I honestly can't wait to go back and listen to this one. So thank you again.
Brent, appreciate it.